He's my great-grandfather. He seems to have led a reasonably unremarkable but steady life. He married Emily Brown, with whom they had 7 children. And he built a home out near Morawongla, which was a property originally owned by Richard Rouse. And he built a house there, which I'll show you. I've got some very recent pictures from, and this is not a good picture because of the technology, but let me see. Can you see that?
No.
It's built out. It's the classic slab building.
Your finger's in focus, but the picture's not.
I have to move backwards. If we go to full screen, I don't know how I do that. No. But I can send these to any one of you. They're very good, clear pictures. So the house is still there, and the graves of Richard and Emily are still there and very clear, reasonably well preserved. They probably need a bit of attention. The next son was John Laurie Hassall. He was given a run named Peter Dufferty by his uncle, George Rouse. He died in 1899. He's buried at St Matthew's in Windsor. By the way, Jonathan and Mary are both buried at St Matthew's at Windsor. The tomb there is not in good shape, and I'll come back to that later. Then there was Edwin Otu Hassall. He was only 8 years old when Jonathan died. And on his marriage certificate, he describes himself as a Castlereagh River squatter. His mother, Mary Rouse, Mary Hassall named Rouse, it wasn't too impressed with him and sort of controls his will. He was actually a confirmed alcoholic and died of complications at 72. So these are the stuff that crawl out of the woodwork. And then there was Mary Cover Hassall. She was described as the beauty of her day. She was married the Honourable William Walker, but she was his second wife. He was originally solicitor in Windsor, and he brought 2 children with him from his previous marriage. She bore him 2 children, but died in 1858, aged 29. He then married Henrietta Cooper, and she died at age 34, having had 8 children. And then he married Jessie Wood, who died, having borne 4 children. So he was left with 16 children, which is an extraordinary thing. But he was elected to the Legislative Assembly in 1860. He was the mayor of the Windsor Borough Council in 1878. So I said, frankly, I would have turned him over to Miss Marple. He sounds a bit sus to me. But looking into these sorts of things gives you an idea of the toughness of living in those days, insight to the paucity of obstetric, education and support, and maybe a little bit of alpha male behaviour. But these are the sorts of things that come out of looking at these. Charles Hassall didn't marry, but he was drowned, and there's a plaque in St Matthew's at Windsor saying he died trying to rescue a Chinaman from the Cudgegong River. And he's buried in St Matthew's. The last of those, Elizabeth Hassall, lived only 6 days. And I mean, these are the tragedies of the times. Yeah. Sorry, what's happened here? Bang, bang. I'm sorry, something's weird is going here. All right. So that was Richard's family. And then they had 7 children, of whom 6 survived. The eldest of those was my grandfather, Jonathan Evans Hassall. And we've been trying to find the Evans connection here. Jonathan was a surveyor. He was highly qualified and was chairman of the Lands Board in around Tamworth and the Northern Rivers. And we suspect that it was just out of professional respect that he was named Evans out of respect for Surveyor Evans, as was my mother. She was Jean Evans Hassall. But we've never been able to find any family connection. So he had he had Alice Emily Hassall, who was never married, Ernest Alfred Hassall, who died in infancy, Kate Hassall, who married Frank Lowe, who I know nothing about, Louisa Maud Hassall. I don't know if any of you are related to her, but I only remember her as our slightly dotty Aunt Maud. And Edith. But Jonathan married Mary Hilliard. And in the words of HMS Pinafore, now to my sisters, my cousins, and my aunts. The eldest was Bruce Hassall. He married Isabella May in the USA. And he had children. They had 2 children, Joan, who also married an American, and John Hassall, who only died a couple of years ago. And he was medical superintendent of Royal Prince Alfred Hospital. A nice bloke and a very, very respected man. Richard Arthur Hassall married twice. Edgar Hassall died young. And then there was Don Wilfred Hassall married Annie McGurran. He's referred to in the book, in the first book, as being known as David, but that was never the case. He was always Don. If we slip into the things of the day, he committed the sin in the Hassall family of marrying a Catholic. Annie McGurran was a delightful Irish woman who was Auntie Nan, and but they overcame that, and the sons, one of the sons Mark went to shore in Sydney, and I haven't been able to contact the 3 children. Mark, Nanette, and Jonathan were of the ages of my brother, sister, and me, and we knew them very well, but I haven't been able to track them down. The only thing I know about Mark is he was a great athlete, and he and Jonathan were part of the surf life saving at Yamba, and Mark had an award for actually rescuing somebody in a wild surf. The only black mark against him that I know is that he had a son that played for Collingwood, which in Melbourne is not a good thing. But they lived in Grafton on the banks of the Clarence River, and I have fond memories of that. And then it comes to my mother, who was the youngest, and married George Patrick Brooks. I have a lovely picture of them that you may not be able to see. Taken, no, but I can give these. Taken in Circular Quay in the days when you used to have street photographers, around about circa 1937, 38. But it's a lovely picture of them and of the styles and everything else. The interesting thing about looking at that particular family is that all the women there, with the exception of my mother, were born in the late 19th century. My mother was born in 1903. So they grew up in the very early 20th century. Not one of them had more than 3 children. And that's an extraordinary social change when you look at the number of children that are in the Hassall family in the earlier generation. This is a big change. It sort of shows better education, better awareness, better food, better hygiene, better medical practice. And if you look behind some of the family trees, this is a very big social change. And there's a lot to look for in those sorts of things. Some of them aren't too good or too happy pictures of the family, but this is an extraordinary one to me, having looked through the rest of them and the number of people, the number of children, and all of a sudden, bang, it's only 2 or 3 children. Anyway, that's a look at the Hassalls from my point of view. And before I go on to sort of looking at the reunion and what are the sorts of things from this line we might do, can I have any comments back on the Jonathan line or anything you've heard so far or anything to add?
Well, I've just got I've got an article here which I want to mention to you. It's headed "More of Australia's Wild West," and there's a quote from the Sydney Morning Herald, 28th of March, 1857, and Edwin O2 Hassall discovers body of murder victim. It's quite interesting, actually. I just they had to go out and search for this. This guy got drunk apparently and killed a woman, and then they went out to try and find the body. And it says Mr. Hassall rushed ahead and cried out, "Here's the body!" So that was his moment of fame there. So, interest, a matter of interest. It's a small child, 7 years old, girl, was interviewed. She said, "The last time I saw my mother was when my father was beating her." And it goes on with other things. He struck her on the back with a spade, and then said he would cut her head off. She did not speak. I then ran away to Bantala Station, Mr. Hassall's place. So it's Edwin O2 Hassall got mixed up in that event, evidently, which I found quite interesting. And there's another one here, Government Gazette, 19th of September, 1828. Would it be 18? Wouldn't be 1928. It must be 1828. Hassall brothers helped to capture bushrangers, but that's quite a long story. And where Jonathan Hassall was one of the led the posse, because I'm not reading it out, just from memory, bushrangers came and I think they killed a couple of his shepherds that he had looking after stock. And so he and his brother, I forgot which brother it was now, they got a posse together, went out hunting these bushrangers, and they came upon evidence of them, found one of their injured number, wasn't out scouting, stealing anything because he couldn't move, and so then they set up a trap to wait for these bushrangers, and a bushranger called Donahue was one of them, and so they started a gunfight. These the posse were all lined up in a row, like a fortress sort of row, and the bushrangers, they started a gunfight, which lasted on and off all the rest of the afternoon and all night. And then by morning, most of the bushrangers had sneaked away, especially Donahue, the leader of the gang. And so that was something that Jonathan Hassall was thoroughly involved in through no fault of his own. So you know, one of our members was John Hassall, John, I forget which way he spelled. That's right, he spelled Jonathan with a John. Jonathan Hassall. He was a doctor, married to Elizabeth, one of our members of this organisation. But I think she passed away. They're both old people. But Jonathan, he was very proud. And you mentioned a Hassall that was superintendent of Prince.
He was medical superintendent of Royal Prince Alfred. He was John. We used to joke that we were the only two who escaped being called Jonathan.
Well, this might be, is it not the same one, is it, that I'm talking about?
It may well be, because his wife was Elizabeth, and she's still
Oh,
alive.
that's what I'm talking about. Because in our family, my wife had twins which didn't survive, and one of them lived 12 days. And I used to go and see this poor baby in the hospital each day, and I met John Hassall there. He saw the name. He made himself known to me. He's about my age. And so I thought there was, and I didn't realise, being fairly young, at that stage, this is in the mid-1950s sort of thing, or near the end of the 1950s. And so he's about my age, and I didn't imagine he could be superintendent at that stage.
Oh, this wasn't till, he was superintendent in the late 60s.
Oh, maybe he had a good rising over 10 years. He would have risen up. That's I didn't realise that. Yes.
Oh, my wife nursed at Prince Alfred, and they were all in awe of John. They thought he was amazing.
Oh, that's good. That's nice. Yes. Well, I thought it was very, very nice of him to make himself known, and if he could do anything, which of course at that stage this baby had a reverse connection in the heart or something, and with modern heart operations maybe they could do something these days, but in those days they couldn't. So that was that story.
Oh, that's interesting. That's nice.
So that's all I've got just there.
One of the things that I was going to suggest, and will still suggest, but as far as the reunion is, there are a number of things that can be done. One is there are a number of visits we were talking about. One is a visit to Windsor, to St. Matthew's. It's a beautiful church. And Jonathan and Mary are buried there, but there are lots of other Hassalls. There are quite a few Hassalls buried there. The other one would be to visit Rouse Hill House. Now, it doesn't scream Hassall at you, but she was Jonathan's wife, and it is one of the listed historical houses, or historical houses is now called living museums in New South Wales. We've been out there, and it's beautifully preserved, with the interiors furnished as they were at the day.
Where is this house? Which house is this?
Rouse Hill.
Oh, right. Okay.
Rouse Hill House. And in New South Wales history, the Battle of Vinegar Hill was fought.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So that's another thing. The other thing was to try and see if people would indulge in a bring and show and tell, take them away later, of items that came out of Jonathan's line including photos. I tried to show you them there, but I have some lovely photos of Morawongla, which was Richard's house, of the old house that's still standing there, and the graveyard there. Jonathan and Mary's grave at St Matthew's at Windsor really is not in good shape, and I'd like to see if we could do anything about it in just restoring, or certainly restoring the words on it. But I'll have a look at that. But I think we've got enough time to get to people and say, what have you got? We've got photos running out our ears of the Hassalls, and to bring those along. So we just mount them and put them in order and identify photos against people, because
that's a good idea.
And well, I would like to see us, and I crave your indulgence, can we identify more of Jonathan's tribe? Because then we can exchange photos, and we can identify the sort of 6th, 7th, 8th generations. Because if this is going to survive, we need to get them interested. And then if we do that, maybe we sort of set up some way of meeting and occasionally or regularly. But I think now is the time, and another thing to look at with this reunion is to see how we do involve the 6th, 7th, 8th, 7th, 8th, 9th generations, so that the Hassall name and heritage rolls on.
Thanks.
Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, well, you've picked up. I want to ask Alison and Jane if they've got any questions, or if Tim's got any comments. To ask you, or to observations on what you've shared about. But it seems to me that when we do family history, we do two ends. We do the origin of Jonathan and Mary, and what we know of their children, which is all just historical. We never met them; it's just documentation. And then we start from our own end with our parents and grandparents, and so what I've learned is we're sort of working both ways. You see, we're going from where we are. And then we're also getting historical information down from, I don't know if you put it this way or that way, but
well, the trouble with family trees is they tend to go down there. Family trees go up that way, and there are people out there who are my relations that I've only just discovered.
Yes. Look, I'll just share screen for a moment to just to emphasize this, and so you should be able to now see the genealogy. And there's Jonathan up there. And it comes down. I'm sorry, it's and there's John and Beverly here. Yeah, this is John himself, and so this is part of the family tree, and of course it can go up further, but we can add to this, and we can add information. And when you click on any particular name, you can get the detail of it.
Well, I have 2 other daughters who would be miffed to see only Meredith there.
Yeah. Well, you see, that's the thing about this, is that once you see the tree and you say, hey, I've got other children and grandchildren, etc. But you mentioned a number of things about process. Each household has few treasured photo albums and photos, and often people think, oh, that's just a few photos, it doesn't amount to much, but it's actually very valuable. And not only it could be possible to encourage people to bring some photos, but we might even have a scanner there, and with their permission, take a good scan of it. Or it may not be, and we might just start the process there. But you really need to visit people in their houses and say, can we take an afternoon and, with your permission, scan, so you're not taking away from the house, but you're getting a high quality scan. And the same for documentation. So that's the process side of collecting materials. But on the thematic side, you mentioned a number of things which are recurring themes for the Hassall history. One is the laws, the patriarchal laws that favored males over females in property. And yet often it was the women who lived longer than the men and had to hold the families together. And so there's this constant looking at what resources were left to the women in the family to ensure quality of life for all their children after their husbands had passed away. Often they remarried, and then sometimes their husband would take control over those resources which Roland had built up, given to the daughters, and then it went off to their partners in the ventures that they wanted to do. So one is the patriarchal laws that the women had to deal with. Another is the rule of law, that in these early days in New South Wales, you had to fend for yourself. And it would be interesting to see how many of our forebears were held up by bushrangers, because I know James was, and so I see that Jonathan was, and I've got this article here. My father was talking about it, and I've got an article called Highway Robbery, and it describes that in detail. So I think there might be a few others as well, in addition to the burglaries that happened to Roland and the bashings. So there's this rule of law and security aspect to it. And another is alcoholism, which is not talked about, but it's there, and it really had an effect on a lot of the families, but also mental health. And that's something that is still a concern today for young people or for people of all ages. And some of our forebears really struggled with, just keeping it all together with the uncertainties of life on the land. They were given land, which meant therefore they had to be farmers. Well, maybe they weren't cut out to be farmers, but that's all they could do. And they had this tough lives, eking out an existence out of the land, and it didn't work for all of them. So that it was a really tough time. They had both privilege and hardship in those early settler days. And it's a very...
They started off, many of them, the early ones, being given land and some convicts to help them build it up. And when transportation stopped, that stopped. And a lot of people found it very hard after that to keep going. And who was it? James, I think, had problems and had to move to Victoria.
I think that was in the 1840s, but transportation stopped. Is it 1860s, or have I got that wrong?
1850s, 1860s, around about that.
Yeah. So, but yeah, so that Roland did amazingly well. He was getting new land every 3 years. It was just rolling in land. And then it was all given to, all 8 children were given land. And the third generation started to have it tough in the 1840s, when there was depression and foreclosures and things. And it's a very interesting pattern to see, the cyclical nature of the success of the generations. But a lot of the family members really did it tough, generation after generation. And we shouldn't just highlight, the successful career of Thomas or the wonderful career of Roland. That was all true. But some of their children and grandchildren really had a tough existence in the pioneer fringes of New South Wales, Victoria and Queensland.
Well, it brought it home to me when looking at Richard's home. He built this house at Morrawonga up around Gulgong, and it was a successful farmer. When you look at the house that's there, to try and bring up children in that today, it was subsistence living. They were given land, but that land had nothing on it. They had to make it work, cut down the trees, and so on. But they were pretty good at extracting land from the early governors, because there weren't many free people. And the governors were trying to develop, move, especially once they were over the mountains. It was tough.
Well, over to Jane. Alison, you've got some questions or some comments on focusing on Jonathan and Mary, but more broadly on that generation. Love to hear what you're thinking about.
Well, I have to confess, Graham, I really don't know much about Jonathan and the Rouses at all. Marrying into that family. I mean, I haven't even been to St Matthew's, Windsor, which is a terrible thing to admit, but I haven't been.
Alison, I'll take you. I've been a few times.
Great coffee out there, Jane.
We'll do another excursion.
Yep. So what all that you were saying, John, I just don't know about it all. So it was all very interesting. But I do agree, Graham, that the family, we keep on saying, oh, this is great and that's great. But there was a lot of tough things, even though some of them had mental health problems, and we know that, and it was a real issue. But even the successful ones, talking about Thomas and Roland, my goodness me, they had some tough gigs to get through. So they had toughness as well. I don't think anybody had it easy at all. It was just a huge challenge for everybody from every side, Indigenous side. I mean, you've got these colonials coming in, you've got the colonials themselves having to forge against the adversity. And I think if we had to go around giving gold awards, they'd all be given out to all those people, whether they had a name that lived on forever afterwards, or whether they just simply survived.
Well said.
Tough.
Yes, I think we just forget how tough it was. A completely undeveloped foreign land, with some fairly desperate convicts, ex-convicts wandering around, and an Aboriginal population which sometimes was friendly and sometimes wasn't. There's one of the stories in there was it Samuel, who was robbed and attacked, and one of the comments at the time was he was probably would have been safer staying in Tahiti than coming out here.
So that was wrong.
I must say, from what I've read about Tahiti in the last few days, I don't think so. I think it would have been better here than Tahiti. But I was talking to my mother today, and we were discussing about Thomas living up in Port Macquarie and how tough it was there, and how he really couldn't change the way that they were treating the convicts there. And we were talking about one young convict fellow, probably obviously had a bit of a spark in him because he was given 462 lashes, and Mum was saying, wouldn't one have been enough? 462, what was in these people to actually do stuff like that? I mean, we talk about those things, and then there are things in today, but it was tough all round, whether you're a convict or anybody. Tough.
Jane, you were going to say something?
Oh, I was just going to say, John, Rouse Hill House. I joined Sydney Living Museums a few years ago when I started doing part-time work as opposed to my full-time job as a teacher. So that's when I started. I wanted to see what were the houses of the day like. How did people live? What were the implements, the furnishings? And I can fully recommend Rouse Hill House. It's fabulous. It's well kept, beautiful property, as you say. I commend how they've kept it. I think it's been in the same family for many years. And now it's part of the Sydney Living Museum. So, John, that's a great idea to add that.
So can I grab you? Because when I go into the websites of Sydney Living Museums, the idea of a family reunions, special visit on a Saturday or something like that, doesn't appear to be too friendly to that. So if you can give me some feedback about how we might go about that, that'd be very helpful.
Yeah, no, it was terrific. And the other thing that Sydney Living Museums do, I don't know if you know about Sydney Open.
Yes.
Have you ever done that, John? Have you or anyone else?
I did that for Sydney Hospital once, but
did
that's another story, but it was very interesting.
Yes, absolutely fabulous. 2 days. Alison and I did it, didn't we, Alison?
Yeah.
It was in the middle of, wasn't lockdown, was it? But it was during the last 2 years when, I don't know, when did we do it? We couldn't do the, oh, I know, we had our own audio thing, didn't we? Everything wasn't open. It was a self-guided tour. But again, very well done.
The interesting thing there was explaining to younger people what the, with the donations up there, what the 3 figures were, because they had no concept of pounds, shillings and pence.
Oh, well, on currency, the book called Rum, A Distilled History.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
You must read it, but
Yeah.
it points out that these smart British came out and made a colony, but had no provision for money. They didn't think of currency, which brings up the question of if Roland had a store in place by something like 1804, what currency was he using to do his trading?
He was using, there was still currency circulating because there were a lot of visiting ships, and they brought in
Spanish florins, etc.,
and silver doubloons and all sorts of things. And I think it was Macquarie who stepped in and said, right, we'll take these, and these will be the currency. And that's where he took, I think it was a Spanish real, and said, we'll punch a hole in it so it is different. And this was the holy dollar.
Yeah.
And it was given a value depending on, and the dump, which was the middle bit, became a smaller coin.
Right.
And
Interesting.
that's well documented.
Yeah. Okay.
Of course, coin had to merge its way in. Remember, we were transcribing a letter recently that Roland was conversing with the King of Tahiti, and Roland wanted, the King of Tahiti wanted something, and he was going to pay Roland in hogs. And it started off as 1 hog, and then it ended up as being, well, as many hogs as you like. So it took.
There was still lots of barter.
If he said hogshead heads, that would have gone down well with the rum corps.
Right. So John, the question of adding an excursion to Windsor to the event next year is a really great idea, and even if it's only a few people who take it up, it's better than nothing. And most of us didn't even know that connection until you raised it with us. As Alison said, we don't know much about the Jonathan line, and having you on board helps us to be aware. And also Rouse Hill, I'm sure I passed it many times in my youth, and I had no idea that it was connected to them. So, but I think most of
neither did I until I started reading.
So we need an article. Was it ever featured in the newsletter, Dad? The Rouse Hill connection?
I don't think so.
Not as such. No, it is fairly well known. I've seen the mention of Mary Rouse in Governor Macquarie's diary, sort of thing. I've seen that.
Right.
So she worked. Wasn't she the governor's also? She
was a tutor to the governor's daughter.
That's right.
And a companion.
I think was it 2 children? I think there were 2 children.
And of course,
did Macquarie have 2 children there, or am I mistaken? Anyway,
I don't know. I was just going to say, as a teacher, you suddenly start to realise how small Australia is when you've suddenly got students in front of you that you know you're related to them because they've got surnames like Arndell or Broughton Rouse, and there's connections all over the place that, it's got to be.
Right.
That was just a little aside.
Well, if you want a really good read, there's a book out by Margaret Cameron Ash called Beating the French to Botany Bay.
Oh, yeah.
And it is an extraordinary picture of how close we came to becoming French and all the machinations she takes it. She's a lawyer as well as a historian, and she takes us all the way back to before the American Revolution and the machinations and how all this was tied up with Pitt the Younger being much more interested in other things. it's a fascinating read, and it's a very easy read. It's called Beating the French to Botany Bay.
Thanks, John.
If you, we know exactly what would have happened if we'd landed on at the same time, because if you go to Akaroa in New Zealand, that half of the town is in English and that half of the town is in French, because they did a deal. The English beat the French there by 2 days, only because the French wouldn't sail in a storm. But the English thought, we blowed you French, we're going to get there sooner than you. But they did a deal. So maybe it would have been an interesting thing in Botany Bay. Would half the baby...
Oh no, the cover of the book is the English, the first fleet sailing out of Botany Bay as La Perouse sailed in.
Wow.
It was as close as that.
Yeah.
And the other fascinating thing about it was the usual thing was, you know, Cook found Botany Bay, sailed up the coast past this bit that was the entrance of Port Action, and took no notice of it. Wrong. He had, with his couple of men, taken a trip up north from Botany Bay, seen Port Jackson and said, wow, we're not going to tell anybody about this because this is probably one of the best harbours I've ever seen. And the fact of the harbour was known, and it was one of the best kept secrets. Nobody was going to know that. And their destination was to go there. The other fascinating thing is, as a lawyer, she's saying, the whole business of coming around and planting your flag in the ground was absolutely pointless. You had to, the law of the day, or the accepted law, was you had to inhabit the land before you could claim it. So Philip getting here and putting tents up was more important than whatever Cook had done. And that was dubious anyway. It's a fascinating story.
Yeah, I'm going to look that up. Thanks for
Very good.
I want to bring Tim in. Tim, I've got your family tree on this chart, and I'll, if you're interested to see it, so you're definitely here.
Yep.
Can you see that?
Hang on.
So if you can see the screen, I've got you in there.
Yeah, that's me.
Yeah.
Yep.
So the red line shows the descendants from Thomas.
Yeah.
Although it doesn't go all the way up there, but that shows the line down. And so, you know, it just shows that's one portion of the family tree there.
Yeah, fantastic.
So there's a lot of people with Braden surname already in the chart there.
Yeah, I think my mother kind of helped put that all together in 98.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great to hear. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember talking to, I think there were 2 men called Breeden. Were they brothers?
Yes, Michael and Tony.
Anyway, I spoke to both of them, and they were interested at the time. I remember distinctly that name at the time in 1998.
I forgot on screen there. Michael passed away 2018.
Yep.
And Tony in 1997.
97.
Well, oh, I see.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Anyway, so I just wanted to show you that. So
Thank you. That's on a. Is that on a? That's not on Ancestry, or what's that?
it's on a software called Family Tree Maker.
Yeah.
And we can link it fully to Ancestry. We haven't done that yet. Because we haven't sort of worked out, in a sense, like when people add to it, how do you verify the information's correct, etc. And
yeah,
so we just haven't worked that through. But it's fully, we can integrate that to Ancestry.
Yeah.
We need someone to take on that project. I'm a caretaker for that project, and we're looking for someone who's got a real interest in that to, take it 100 miles an hour.
Okay. Now, if anybody wants anything from me in the way of pictures or anything I've spoken about tonight, just if you've got my email address, send it to me and I'll bounce it back to you.
Thank you, John. John, do you have a good scanner at home?
a reasonable scanner.
Okay.
In terms of what I've got the photos on file as
Yep.
photos.
Oh, okay. So my father's over the years has done a fair bit of that sort of thing. And I've got Rouse pics here. Hang on. I've got Rouse pics. Let's see what we've got. Okay, I'm going to share screen and we'll get some Rouse pics. This is from my father's materials. Just got to put that up there and do a share screen. So cumbersome, isn't it? Rouse pics here. Now, I don't know what happens when I click on these, but so here.
Yes, I'd forgotten about those. Yeah, that's
So, these are you seeing the big picture that I clicked on?
yeah. I can
No.
see, we can see
Yes.
them.
Yep.
Yes.
They're all like little postage stamps.
No,
Yeah.
no, I'm this is the trouble with Zoom. Once you click on something, it doesn't see. I'm doing this. So you look at this. That's it. So
Oh, that's
Mm.
good.
and it just says Rouse. That's all it says.
Oh.
And clicking on the next one.
Oh. Goodness.
Now you can see a woman there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is all called Rouse pics.
Mm.
So
Oh.
we're
But you
building
don't know
up.
who they-
That says spate, but EA spate.
Yes.
Mm.
Fabulous photos.
Yeah, absolutely.
So my father will have got these from someone contributing them, probably with, maybe it's this file here, Richard Rouse. I don't know.
Mm.
No. Lots of them.
Graham,
Look at
the
that.
Oh, look at that.
Wow.
oh, that's
that.
yeah, that's the property. Yeah, what?
It just says Rouse. It's slide 13.
Oh.
Mm.
Unless I can find a list in here. But there's some with captions. But I was just giving an example of how, just to have these photos online,
Mm.
and gradually we'll, they'll come together.
Mm.
So
Well, we need to get a little booklet out of those and then try and put the names to the pictures.
Yeah.
There's a list of the names there, and but they were separated. I didn't want to write on the face of the pictures.
right, of course.
They're probably written on the back of them. That's the thing.
Yes. Yeah.
You can't turn them over. But I can't remember where I got those from. But I was involved with a lot of the organisation of 1998, and people used to send pictures in, which is very good of them. And I did send them all back. I must claim, I sent them all back after I'd scanned them.
Then there's this other type of technology here, which is it's Google Photos. And I haven't done it with the family pics yet, but once you identify people, you can you can get the software to help you.
Oh, that's good, interesting.
And but I haven't applied this. You've got to upload it to Google Photos, and then you let it do the searching of faces for you.
Very good. That's fantastic.
So
No, that's scary.
yeah, well, if it's used for the right purposes, it's
Yes.
a great boon to history. Yeah. So there's many tools out there to get things going.
Very good.
Okay, well, I'll give you a download, Graham, and if anybody wants that, let me know.
John, that would be great, because I think that's the direction of things. So look, you mentioned a couple of things. One is just getting the Windsor trip organized and on the program.
Yeah.
You will get some takers for that.
Yeah.
And then it can be done again in the future, just organize trips and to
Oh
wrap
yes,
up as well.
I think the once identified, because I had never identified Rouse Hill or Richard Rouse with the Hassalls, and I don't think many people have, but it's worth looking at. It really is. And he was a very important person in the early days.
But that also means that we have to look at the State Library catalogue collection and see what's there under the name of Rouse. and see what comes up
Mm.
of relevance. So that's one thing. The other is, you get started. I would love to receive any photos that you already have scanned.
Yep.
And that would be great. And then, we can put some in the future newsletters, encourage others. And then also this series, you do have relatives you're in touch with from the Jonathan line. They're not that many, but we can have this again early in the new year. Just do it again. And I think sometimes it takes 3 times before people cotton on to something. And, they'll see in the November newsletter that it's happened. And then if we advertise in the November newsletter for the next series of family line meetings in, say, February, March, in the lead up to May, I think we'll get more people online. It's a theory anyway. We can test it scientifically.
Never abandon a good theory just because it doesn't work.
Okay, all right. So, John, I would think we're gonna wrap up for this evening, unless there's other topics or ideas.
So that's as far as I can go, unless you want pictures of my great-granddaughter in Paris.
10th generation.
That just makes me sick.
Yeah. Okay. Well, John, thanks so much for tonight, and thanks everybody for coming online.
Thanks, John.
Yes, thank you very much.
We'll end the session, and we'll be
Thank
in
you.
touch.
Okay.
Okay.
Right.
Everyone.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Okay. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.